It's recording.
Have you got it? Oh, sorry, I'm on mute. Sorry, I'm not.
Yeah, sorry about that. His mum's gone to a funeral, so I've got him all day.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was saying that World Suicide Prevention Day, it's a big issue for humanity, but it's also a big issue for men especially. Sowing Seeds has been working with men from 2004 to 2011. I went away and I've come back, and I think having had an experience around suicide myself personally a long time ago, over 30 years, but I feel it's really, really relevant to kind of share a context and kind of open a discussion where members of the public can just have a conversation about how we get there and how we support human beings who are at risk of suicide. And I suppose the general topic of mental health, and especially men, I suppose, coming from out of the pandemic where people have been placed in situations which otherwise may not have impacted on them. I think mental health has become a really, really, really big subject of conversation, and how the pandemic has impacted upon people's mental health. So I think it's important to kind of look at that, and I'm sure the numbers, if we kind of get into that around men and mental health through the pandemic, we may see that there's been a rise in the number of men attempting suicide or actually being successful in taking their own lives. So I suppose it's just to open a discussion about that. I mean, I have a quote that I'd like to share, and it's a really, really simple thing. It says, "Our karma is our life, and what happens in it is our responsibility." So we have an opportunity to learn from what's happened and also provide guidance on what can happen going forward. So a lot of people who end up in a situation where there are mental health issues, you know, they talk about survival and recovery, but what does that look like, and where can you get the necessary support, and how do we garner that support, one within our own community as African Caribbeans in Britain, but just as a whole as human beings. So yeah, it's just to kind of open that discussion and hear what other people have to say.
Okay, I'll start. I feel amongst the Black community, it's a bit of a taboo subject in regards to mental health and speaking out. Like probably growing up, we've just been told we've grown accustomed to keeping things confined within ourselves. But one thing that I do like is there's a surgence of a lot of Black influential people speaking about getting counseling, for example. And I feel that's having a big effect on making that conversation easier around other groups of people, that it's accessible, and it's something that shouldn't be looked down upon. That it's just like, if something's wrong with our bodies, we're happy to go to the hospital to get that tended to, but why do we not view the mind as the same thing? And I feel like the conversations and the mentality towards these types of things is shifting. So in regards to what you was touching on with anxiety, like depression is worrying about the past and anxiety is worrying about the future. I feel like in regards to myself, I've had a lot of thoughts around death lately, and it has caused a bit of anxiety from that aspect of things. Thank you, sir. And I feel what probably made it easier was looking into things like, I watched a video of a yogi who transitioned, and he chose to transition. So he was like, I don't want to wait till I'm old and grey. I'm ready to go now. And like he sent letters to everyone saying I'm ready to pass. And then it was like a ritual, a ceremony where he laid down. I was like in a meditated Savasana state and just passed away. And it just looked so peaceful. And that helped a lot watching that like set my mind at ease a lot in regards to death. Like I'm not worried about death in the sense of dying, but in the sense of how I die. It's just, you know, because there's so many ways that you can pass. So that's probably what I was more anxious about. And I feel, because it's probably more of a prominent thought because my granddad passed away last year, and I was looking into more things because he died through something wrong with his heart. So I started looking at like how long it usually takes when you pass after having a heart attack, and it was saying between 2 to 20 seconds. And that probably rested my mind at ease as well, that it's not like a long time of pain and suffering, that it can be over within something as quick as 2 seconds. So I feel after looking into these things, it's kind of eased any anxiety, any anxious thoughts that I was thinking surrounding these subjects.
Okay. It's interesting that you spoke about death. And I suppose the one thing that has been brought home to me is that death is inevitable. How you get there and what happens within that process are two different things, I suppose. Especially today, suicide isn't something which people logically think about. Oh, today I'm going to go and take my life and that's the end of that. There is some planning in it if they're really serious, but even the fact that they've planned it doesn't always necessarily mean it's going to go to plan and that they are going to pass. And if they don't, what happens after that point? Where did they actually go to kind of reconcile and resolve? Gosh, I went to this place. How did I get there? I mean, I've shared part of my story on Facebook and LinkedIn, and I was in that predicament. I took chloroform, which is known, if you take that, you're gone, it's an anesthetic. But in the experience, I did die. But then, you know, the near-death experience, at the time, I had no idea, no understanding or anything. So when I came to, it's like, well, I'm here. What do I do? And sometimes I think in being able to prevent situations like that is knowing that there's support mechanisms available for people who they can speak to. There's a lot more information available through social media and on the internet. There's a lot more support groups. There's the professional help through psychology and psychiatry and cognitive behavioral therapy. There's group work. There's groups for anxiety and depression. But all of it is about having a space and an environment that's going to support any individual to speak about their own personal experiences and have that kind of validated and seen in a way where they can move forward. So it's not this shameful and guilty experience that we kind of look at it as. In terms of the yogi, that's the path that I took. It took a while to get there, but from that near-death experience, it kind of fueled a kind of inquiry about, well, what is this? What is this all about? And how can it make a difference? At the time, I had no idea, but I think, especially within our own community, one, it wasn't a topic that you could speak about. Two, there was a whole raft of shame and guilt around the experience and being able to speak to other people about it. I suppose a close-knit circle of friends knew and other people in the community knew, but it wasn't a subject that was public knowledge or publicly spoken about. It was always done kind of in the quiet and behind closed doors. So I think, especially now, for younger people, where there is a higher incidence of young people attempting to self-harm, attempt suicide, and actually passing through suicide. I think it's something which is extremely important that, one, within our own community we address, and two, that we kind of make links with organizations that are working in that field. I know, for instance, 42nd Street in Manchester have had and have a suicide and self-harm group, and it's vitally important that, you know, organizations and individuals know about resources that are out there that they can access and that will work with them in a very positive and proactive way.
Can I add something? Sorry.
Yeah.
Firstly, Otis, if you hope you don't mind me calling you by your first name. That was a really powerful share. Thank you, and that was a really candid and honest that you kind of having these thoughts, and even just to admit that is quite, you know, people even struggle with admitting that. I think for me, and particularly during this time, I'm kind of, I had, my father passed away 3 years ago, and in a sense, it was like suicide because he chose not to take a medical procedure. He chose not to take the medicine or the treatment that he wanted. And it was really basic. He had kidney problems and needed dialysis. And he chose not to do it. And in that sense, he made a choice not to go on. And it was really difficult to understand that, particularly as he's a father who's got children. We all kind of, you know, you would hope that your parents would want to be here for you, but we're all grown, I suppose. I think that one of the things with suicide, I think there's two things. Number one, we don't talk about death. We don't process death. Like he was describing, the experience of death sounds so scary. It's just this thing that's so scary and so awful and so painful. I mean, actually, being with my dad, I stayed with my dad until his last, you know, from he decided to make the decision until he passed. I stayed with him, and actually, there was a lot of joy in a funny kind of way. Do you know what I mean? There was laughter. There was a real healing time. So all the things that we hadn't got to speak about, we got to speak about. So there was a real time for healing, a real time for joy, and a lot of love. And you know, obviously people die in various different ways, but it wasn't as awfully scary as I thought it was. And he slipped away quite peacefully. He took a final breath and then he went. I mean, I don't think that we talk about death or we face death or we have this real, we're so scared of death and, you know, it's final, that actually, if we start to look at embracing death and having, like Barrington is saying, just more general conversations about death, I think that kind of opens up, that can kind of make us feel less anxious around it. And with suicide, I suppose that I loved your idea about depression as thinking about what happened, and anxiety thinking about the future. Maybe that kind of practice of trying to stay a little bit focused on now and realizing that whatever's happened, there's a possibility to get better, and maybe some kind, I don't know, just some self-development stuff that we don't get caught up in the externals and caught up in the news and all the other things that tell you that you have and what you haven't got, and kind of focus that, I don't know, there's some work around how we kind of process life and how we see ourselves fitting into life. I don't know, I just wanted to share that. I don't know if that was helpful.
I think that's quite poignant what you're saying, because I suppose from my own experience, having had the near-death experience, and after I'd had it, I kind of, whoa, gosh, what is this? What is this about? I don't understand. So I went and did some research about near-death experience, and I found that there's a lot of people that have had those experiences, whether that was on the brink of taking their own life because life situations had got the better of them. They'd been in long-term depression and they felt that it was the only avenue that they could take to alleviate that hurt and pain. Or people just on a whim, I've had enough, I don't want to be here anymore, and they make that choice. But in the choice that when I did it, my aim was, I'm gone. I didn't want to be here. But then I found there's levels to life, and I was sent back as I'm still here. But in that, having had that experience, it's being able to view life in a much bigger sense. And I think a lot of the spiritual conversations these days and back then are talking about understanding life, and that life and death do coexist, and having the conversation about death and the process towards death. So, you know, anxiety and depression can lead a person to have negative thoughts, suicidal thoughts, having a detrimental negative attitude about who they are and their role in life. I think when you look at the statistics, they're saying something like 1 in 40 men either attempt or take their own life every day. Not saying that we're kind of being discriminatory towards women, but I think with men, because we're so used to keeping everything close to our chest and having this idea of what a man is and how a man is supposed to be, that whole conversation sometimes gets kind of reduced and suppressed because, you know, we're men and we're supposed to be strong. But I suppose in working with young people, I've been shown that there's a kind of resilience in, they're quite open about, I feel like this and I feel like that. And yes, I've had these thoughts. Whereas with the adults, and I suppose our conditioning has shaped us in a particular way, we're not so open about these conversations. So like Otis was saying, there is a massive shift in the way in which the conversation is being expressed and exposed in the general public, but also the way in which people who are feeling that way, there's a lot of support, there's training, there's organizations that are working with young people, with adults, the whole idea of counseling. I mean, I've undertaken counseling courses and I've been on counseling, and they make a difference because it's just having that avenue to speak about where you are in a particular situation, and having had the opportunity to get a reflection back on, well, you know, do you feel that way? Are you still in that place? And what can be learned from that situation, not just in terms of how you think, but how you feel and how you see yourself in relation to others and your place in the world. So it is a very broad conversation, and it's being kind of expressed in numerous different ways. So I think, you know, today we're talking about prevention. So it's looking at the support mechanism. And I suppose this is one avenue where people are sharing experiences that they've had and how that has impacted them and allowed them to move forward in particular ways. The experience in and of itself maybe still provides some hurt, some pain, some understandings, but the fact that we can have the conversation in itself is a massive step, especially within the Black community. So I feel that it's important that we kind of stress to the community that there are opportunities to learn from experiences of great trauma, and especially in this time, you know, in recovering from the pandemic, that there are going to be a lot more people who are experiencing mental health, and that it's just to share with them that there are spaces where people can come and share, where it is safe, and that they can speak about whatever that is that's causing them that hurt and pain, and maybe leading them down the path to want to terminate their own life. Has anyone got anything else to say?
Just also I wonder with the idea that, you know, we are dragged along by life and circumstances and situations happen to us rather than us being able to take some control and having a certain amount of control in terms of how we navigate life, and kind of really tooling people up and making them understand. Like, so there's organizations and there's loads of stuff, and I agree there's loads of resources, but I think there's also basic tools that people can have, like everyday tools, like we talk, you know, and some of it might sound a bit airy-fairy for some people, but like things like meditation, things like affirmation, just things that kind of keep your head still quiet and keeps you remembering that you're in control and life isn't dragging you. Sometimes you can feel like you're being dragged left and right by life rather than being in the control of your destiny. And I think that when you have an understanding that you're in control of this, it gives you a little bit more power, and you know that this situation is going to change and that might help you when you're in those dark days. Otis, I see that you want to say.
Oh, no, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to elaborate and add to what you were saying, but definitely mindfulness is a key component from the aspect of prevention being better than cure, but even as a remedy for when you are in those dark spaces. And I feel it's something that would definitely more veering towards organically. And for myself personally, when I was feeling a bit anxious, like mindfulness routines definitely helps, like doing the yoga, meditation, even just breathing exercises. And it's not a one size fits all, it's a bespoke approach for each individual of whatever helps them get out of that situation. But yeah, I feel yeah, there's, like you said, there's many different tools that individuals can use to get out of the situation. And it's funny that well, it's not funny, but about a month ago in one of the WhatsApp groups that I'm in, there's a group of us that grew up together, and one of them disclosed that he did try to take his life about 5 years ago. But it was interesting to see the way how the conversation shaped after he made that disclosure. And yeah, it was very comforting seeing how my friends responded, and everyone was just expressing love to each other, and just letting each other know that we're here for each other if we ever feel like we get in that space again. And yeah, that was just a good conversation that we all had. I was happy that he felt comfortable to disclose it, and we grew from that conversation.
Just, it's amazing. Just to add to that, when I grew up, my dad told me that men couldn't cry, that it was a physical impossibility for men to cry. So I grew up with this notion that men don't cry. And I think I had a boyfriend and he cried, and I thought he was something was wrong with him. What is wrong with this guy? He's like, can't control his emotions. And it's so beautiful to hear from kind of growing up and hearing that men can't cry and that men don't express and don't share the emotions. So kind of hearing that somebody can share something so personally like that, and rather than people kind of giving them side eye and thinking, as they say down here, you're moist. Do you know what I mean? That actually that's a really, that's a really brave and a really courageous thing to do, and share love. And that's so heartening. And I think that it's beautiful that we're moving into that space, that people are so much more understanding. And I think as a community, we do have to let go of some of those kind of old school ways that we've been growing up, that men have to be this or men have to be that. And even as I journey through life, I'm having to unpack some of those things that I've been told about what men, because I still find it difficult when I see a man cry, because I just have it ingrained that men cannot physically cry. It's not that they don't want to cry, they just have this button that doesn't allow them to cry. So even me having to unpack that has been quite a journey. So it's interesting to hear what you're saying.
I suppose one of the things I would say is that as growing up as a young man, we all cried, and we all had experiences where we just cried for no reason. And I think part of the condition is that, like you say, what you're crying for, I'll give you something to cry for. So there's this fear about expressing your emotional nature as a man, and I think that cuts across the board. But also, if you do share that emotional nature, it's how not just men, women, how young people process that. Is it a sign of weakness? Is it a sign of strength, a courage, faith, whatever? But the tools, because in looking at prevention, like Otis was sharing about mindfulness, I mean, having been in an experience where I was given the opportunity to share the whole repertoire of who I am when I was a practicing devotee of a guru in Rosendale, Ramana Devi. And we were allowed, we were encouraged to cry. We were encouraged to just express that vast array of emotions, but also given tools such as breathing, yoga, meditation, just taking a walk in nature, having people around you that, if you're feeling really bad, you can speak to. And it allows you to kind of unpack the conditioned beliefs about one, who you are as an individual, but also the roles of men, women, how we interact and how we kind of journey through that discourse of well, what is it to be a man? What is it to be a woman? How do we process our emotions and our thinking? What do we do? I mean, one of the things I do constantly now is I'll journal. I'll write if I get random thoughts or things are going a bit, I'm not sure. I'll write. And it's a very cathartic process. But then I've seen, you know, in looking at certain groups on YouTube and things like that, they're talking about all of these mechanisms and tools that can support people to kind of unpack their own head chatter. Because, like you say, human beings, they suffer their imagination and the past. The imagination is what's happening in the future, which is anxiety. The past is the depression. Oh, I could have done, I should have done, if only. That's the depression. So it's, you know, it's getting that juxtaposition of how do I function right here, right now in the moment. And one of the lessons, the biggest lessons I've learned is what is there to be learned from this particular experience? What is it showing me about the whole process of life? And how can I utilize that, not just for myself, but from others? Because the very act of sharing, especially in an African context, if one person in the village is sick, the whole village is sick. It takes a village to raise a child. So as a community, if we're not speaking about things, but we know they're taking place, are we complicit in actions that other people take or not? Is there a responsibility to have open, constructive conversations about issues that have been difficult in the past? And I think, you know, today we're talking about suicide, but there are a range of things and issues that pertain to our community in humanity that we need to speak about. And I think, like you say, Otis was saying, and Simone, you've been saying that the space for those conversations is a lot more open, and they're a lot more supportive and encouraging in being able to find tools and solutions to these things rather than kind of sweeping it underneath the carpet. Hopefully, Sowing Seeds is going to continue to provide open forums where people can discuss these kind of issues, and along with, you know, people in the community, Otis, Simone, you know, we can create a network where we're actually linking and using our skills and abilities to provide that necessary support for people.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm seeing a lot more organizations popping up that are providing these types of support. Like you mentioned, 42nd Street. So my colleague Angeli at TAP, she also works for 42nd Street full time, and that's opened me up more to the types of services that they are providing, and even ones specifically for Black men. So it is good that it's being identified and that there are attempts to address these issues. So yeah, I'm happy with the direction that things are moving in. Also, Barrington, we do have a men's group that was initially set up by someone for these types of conversations, which you can invite you in. And if you're interested, you could just make it a Sowing Seeds group and just facilitate types of conversations that you want moving forward.
Yeah, no, I'd be very, very happy to do that. I mean, when I worked in the beginning, when I started Sowing Seeds, it was because I was a single father, and there was very little support for men as single fathers.
Well, that's what the group actually is. It's called Black Father Support Group. But yeah.
Right. And it kind of morphed into this thing that kind of evolved. But one of the things was about mental health and men. I know there's a gentleman in Wales, and one of the things, especially for new fathers, you know, postnatal depression in new fathers is a big thing, but it's not spoken about. So yeah, I'm very, very happy to kind of take on that group and kind of facilitate things. We have programs which we ran then, but they will be more pertinent now because it's a new generation of young men and men. But but the topics and the issues don't really change that much.
Yeah.
And there's links with, I'm in a group on LinkedIn with 56 Black men
Oh,
and
yeah.
dope Black professionals. So there's quite a lot of groups out there working with men, but working with the community to kind of address those things. So yeah, I'd be very happy to do that. And hopefully, you know, we can get some funding and do some things, you know what I mean, over and above kind of the online sessions, because I suppose because of the pandemic, most of the things have been online, but it'd be nice to get some face-to-face meetings. I know, you know, Horace.
Yeah.
He's got a little group, the Game Changer, where he's taking children and families out into the country, just getting out, rural settings, walks, that type of thing. So all these kind of tools and processes and activities can support people to gain a bigger understanding of not just who they are, but alleviate some of the stresses, the anxiety and the depression of everyday life, because I suppose we've been bombarded with, we have to succeed and we've got to do this and we've got to do that. But there's no space within that to look at, well, if I'm so driven and I'm striving so much, where's my downtime? What do I do in that time? What can I encourage myself to do that I can pass on to my children? I mean, one of the things that I found quite amazing, I've got twins and they both were involved, yoga, meditation, walks in nature, being out in the country. And even now, like the 22, they'd be like, Dad, oh, it's great. We'd love to go and live in the country. So it's things like that, just being away from the everyday influences can actually give a very different perspective on life and how that can be.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that you touched on to add some points. So first, there was three things I want to address. But the first thing was you mentioned about the postnatal depression within men. And another thing that I feel is it's something that it's talked about, but I don't feel it's been addressed enough. And I don't know what the actual figure is, but I know it's fairly high. But the suicidal rate amongst men who have issues accessing their children based on the relationship that they have with the children's mum. And I know that's something that even within the group that I mentioned, I know there's a few people having issues with like their children's mum and access to the children. So that's something that should be definitely addressed.
One of the things we did back then is that we actually worked with the family court judges and CAFCAS around access and simple, small things that men can do, because one of the major things that we found is that it does drive men to think about suicide, because there's such a level of despair. And it's the circumstances.
Oh, sorry, let me say this.
You know, the circumstances and factors that can support men to feel more supported in that. And I think it's important that we kind of look at some of those things. Yeah. You have any more comments, Simone?
Sorry, we're potty training him and I could see he needed the toilet.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just saying, I think it's one of those things that it's a major factor in men thinking and feeling anxious and depressed about how they move forward with family, because the stresses and strains of everyday life now bring a whole lot of pressures which they didn't necessarily used to be. And if the support mechanisms are minimal, you can be more likely to end up in a state where you're having mental health challenges. So yeah, it'd be really good to kind of address some of those issues. And I've got quite a lot of information about those. And I think it's increasingly relevant to speak about not just the mental health and the suicide prevention, but what are the factors that would drive somebody to even contemplate that level of life.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
A bit controversial, because I hear the issues around kind of parents, but and I think maybe it's a bigger piece of work that needs to be done around Black relationships. Because I'm a single mum whose children's father who doesn't see the children, regardless of what I do. So there are kind of these two opposing sides, isn't it? Some men who can't see children, who don't want to see, who are unable to see their children, and men who don't want to see their children, and mums who are angry and mums who are not angry. And there needs to be some work in terms of how we're relating to each other, maybe, and understanding the importance that the child plays outside of the relationship. It's such a beautiful thing to see you potty training your child. It's a real blessing to see you kind of act proactively involved in your child's upbringing. But I think it's stuff like you say, nobody really wants to talk about it, but we really do have to address both of our roles as men and females in how we're bringing up the children and how we're interacting and kind of what we're showing. And it is heartening. I'm of a slightly different generation. It's heartening as I see a lot more of the younger seem to be far more proactive in the parenting of their kids. But I think that, yeah, it's definitely, it's a really contentious issue, and there's got to be some work on how we can address, you know what I mean, both sides of the, you know, or it shouldn't happen on either side, right? So we just got to find ways that we can open up these conversations where women are talking to men about why this is going on, men are talking to women about what's going on for them, and we can kind of get to a place of some kind of understanding, because ultimately it's not just our children that suffer, it's our future, right? It's the whole future of our society, right?
I would agree 100%. Like I said, having been a single father and brought up my twins and my youngest one, and there was participation from the mothers, but that experience brought home to me just how difficult it is for mothers, single mothers, bringing up children without the participation of the fathers, and the level of stress and anxiety and depression that kind of brings with it. And I suppose, like you say, it's a bigger conversation, but I suppose in the context of today, World Suicide Prevention, you know, I'm sure there must be, you know, a whole raft of women that have thought, you know what, I can't do it no more. I just can't do it. I can't do it. I don't want to do it.
But the difference is there's no choice.
They have to do it.
All right.
They make a choice to do it, whereas some people choose to opt out and say, right, you know, I've had enough and I can't do it and I'm not going to do it. In terms of the prevention and suicide and the mental health, there's been mechanisms, whether it's conscious or unconscious, that as a community we've put in place, or as humans we've put in place, that provide that support where those issues can be addressed, but it's how we bring those, both men and women and the general population, to address those issues in a manner that brings understanding and support, so that any human being who's in that kind of environment can feel supported and has validation for what they're doing to move forward, rather than kind of trying to live with the shame and the stigma. Well, you know, I got so stressed out that I just opted out. I just didn't want to do anymore. And that's on levels. So, you know, I appreciate the issue that you've brought from both of you, because ultimately, if we don't deal with ourselves in a productive and positive way, it can lead to suicide. And that in itself is a big indictment upon us as human beings. How do we support one another? And what are the mechanisms or resources or activities or organizations that are out there that can help to support us to become better people? And I know time is kind of limited. But yeah, Simone, I give thanks 100 for the participation in the thoughts and experiences that you've brought to Otis. I'm really appreciative, and I would definitely, if you email me or hit me up on WhatsApp, then yeah, I'd be quite happy to work with the group and facilitate some sessions and stuff like that. Yeah. And just if you've got any more closing comments, it'd be appreciated.
Yeah, so you touched on something earlier where you were saying about taking your the twins on nature walks and stuff. So there's 2 projects that we've got coming up where we're trying to address different issues regarding from a mental health and well-being perspective. So the first one is a youth project. So we've been funded by an organization called Patagonia, which is an outdoor clothing company. So they funded us to take groups of young people, groups of young people on different activities. So far we've took them indoor rock climbing, we've took them mountain biking in Wales, and we're taking them hiking next week. So this is the initial stages of a pilot program. We're hoping to be funded for a longer period, from say 5 to 10 years, to do continuous outdoor. It's okay, son, to do outdoor activities. And then another program we've been funded for is, so we felt like there's a lack of unity amongst families since the first generation of Windrush came over here. So, you know, like on Sundays, like all the family would come round and gather and the vibes, but it feels like those traditions aren't being passed down to the next generation. So we've got funding for something which we're going to call Sunday dinners. So initially we was trying to make it on a monthly basis, but we didn't get the full set of funding. So we're going to have, throughout the next 12 months, we're going to have 4 events called Sunday dinners, where we'll provide free food for the community. Everyone can come, and we'll, under my company tab, we have 4 pillars, which is health, education, business, and community. And each one of those events will cover one of those 4 pillars, and we'll have open dialogue and conversations, which will be solution focused, based on addressing these issues impacting our community specifically. So this is what we're trying to do to address these issues.
Yep, man. I think it's big. Do you know what I mean? I suppose in just touching on that, I was a monk. Like I said, I was a devotee of a guru in Rosendale. So for 10 years, I didn't have any, what I would call, material impact upon the world. I was just learning spiritual things and doing things that supported humanity to become better. So being out in nature was one of those things. We lived in a rural village in Rosendale, and it was just a very different understanding of what life is and how that can be, and the impact that it has upon your own health and well-being is a huge thing. And just being able to talk openly and share openly about issues, because as human beings, there's intricacies within us that we may not necessarily talk about. I mean, emotional men, do you know what I mean? Men who feel things, sensitive men, men who are aware, women who are aware, who have had what I would call experiences that are on the periphery. They don't fit into this standardized kind of like black idea of what a man is, what a woman is, but they're out on the limb, or seen as being out on the limb. They're a bit weird and a bit quirky. And then it's about being able to acknowledge the individuality and the uniqueness of humanity, and be able to bring that understanding and that learning to everybody, because life shows us who we are.
I feel that's something that's not taught in school, emotional intelligence. And because while I'm homeschooling my son, that's something that's very prevalent within his education, not just focused on the subjects, but just him as an individual, him as a being, like him being a good person and being aware of how he's feeling and being able to express how he's feeling, and then put those coping mechanisms in place.
But also, sorry, I was also going to say that your stuff around the kind of your Sunday dinners is so important, because I think part of the problem is we don't have that generational support anymore. So actually the wisdom of the elders and even just the generations being able to, the youngers being able to speak to the elders and feel like they have a connection, or they feel that they are part of something. I think part of the problem is people feel so alone. And without those kind of family units, you remember, when you gather on Sunday, you have to go wash up, or you have to do this, or you have to set the table. There was a role, you had a role to play. When Granny talked to you, you better come talk and come correct. You know what I mean? She's talking to you, you better listen, and you have to have a certain level of respect. And she might share a story of her past, and in that sharing, you get an understanding of how things, or just there's a moral or there's a parable in that should be learned. And I think that as we become more fractious, definitely as a community, we're not even good at having relationships with each other, right? So it's become really fractious, that the idea where you can bring people together and start building those communities and building those conversations is so important. And then you have nature and you have all these other tools, but actually the foundation has to start with your home and your family. So then you feel like you belong. If you feel like you belong to something and you feel that you're loved, when you have those moments where you feel a bit desperate and a bit, you know that actually if I drop out, I think that's the difference with mums. Why we can't drop out like that is because we've got something that relies on us, right? Something that's so it's that decision to drop out is really, you stick around, you're depressed, you stick around for your kids, but making sure you feel like part of something, I think is so important. I just I just thought that generational stuff is so, such an important thing.
Yeah. I was going to answer Otis's question. In schools, especially in primary schools now, there is the circle time that they call it, that's what they call it, is about developing emotional intelligence. And in PSHE, from year 10 to year 11, is quite a big component in the actual, it's built into the curriculum. So I know how people deliver it is a different thing, but it's actually there, written into the national curriculum. A lot of the schools now are bringing in ideas and practices around mindfulness and emotional resilience and emotional regulation. So there's a lot of things happening, but I think it's how it's seen and how it's taken, because it's mental health is kind of lumped in one big thing. And a lot of that it comes back to, like you say, Simone.
Well, again, Barrington, though, are they culturally competent? Because you can't just have a one size fits all. And
but I think what I would say is it might sound a bit cheeky and a bit whatever, but I would say that if there are tools that can be utilized and somebody's sharing it with you, you take it and then you make it culturally competent, because you add your experience or your understanding or your knowledge, whether it's passed down, whether it's learned, however you've got it.
I think as adults we can, but if like in those school settings, especially if it's primary schools, they won't necessarily have the skill set to be able to do that, though, innit?
No, but the reality is that I think that so many people feel that you send your children to school and the school has the overall authority of your children, right? They don't. You're still the parent. You're still responsible. You're still the one, right? So it's taking those tools and making them work for you in your household, and how, whatever your experience or however you want to grow your children. I think it's us. I think the whole challenge with all of this, and it's really difficult to say, is that we don't take responsibility, the full responsibility that we need to. Because a lot of these issues can be resolved by us kind of standing up and saying, being a stand for, how do I want my children to behave? Do you know what I mean? And I take my hat off to you. How do I want my children to be? What kind of life do I want? And being really committed to that and doing whatever you think is necessary. And these are the kind of conversations where we want to kind of give people back the power, rather than feeling that the power lies with the teachers. And when you're sick, the power lies with the doctors, and kind of always distilling, you're always feeling like your power or something is always external. Well, actually, I agree with Barrington. If there's tools out there and you don't know, and there's tools out there, you take the tools, you say, that works for me, that don't work for me. I take this, I twist it, I turn it, I add some jerk seasoning on it, I add some jollof rice. It then becomes something that works for me and mine. Do you know what I mean? So taking those tools and utilizing them is really important, I think.
No, therefore, I wasn't disagreeing with it. I was just referencing in regards to those tools being used on children in primary school who aren't able to adapt it to their specific cultural background.
But what I would say to that, Otis, is that from the ages of 0 to 8, cultural competence means nothing. Because the schooling, the education that a child gets from 0 to 8 is at home. They look at the energy dynamics, they look at the practices that families have across the board. So then when they go in school, they might get particular things, and it's not tweaked towards African Caribbean or Muslims or women or, LGBT, because the tools are just the tools. It's up to the individuals or the groups to utilize those tools and make it accessible and workable for their own use. Because tools are just that. A hammer's a hammer. You can knock a man out with it, or you can hit a nail with it. It's still a hammer. And I think that's the point where...
Well, is that not the issue then? Who's using the tools if they're trained to be able to deliver it? So it's
yeah. But the thing is about, I mean, and I know it's veering away from, you know, the whole idea of the conversation we was having today about suicide prevention, but it's all these things.
It's all interlinked, don't it?
It's all interlinked, but what I'm saying is all of these issues bring a level of stress, anxiety, depression, mental health, because we're grappling with so much information and so much understanding, but then we may not necessarily be doing the practical. So we might not be talking to other people, but we're struggling with, well, you know, I want culturally competent children, but they go to school and they're getting that from school. I don't know. So then when I go into the school, because I don't know, I don't feel equipped to challenge the teacher or decide, you know, whoever, because I don't have enough information. So ultimately, everything comes back to us as an individual, what we do, how we do it. And, you know, mental health, health and well-being is like the cornerstone of all of these issues, because if I'm not right, how can I share what's right out there? And one of the greatest learnings I've had is that I had that experience of suicide 30 years ago, 32 years ago. It's fueled a journey that I couldn't see, I couldn't imagine. And it's taken me places where I've learned things which, on the face of it, it's not very black. They're not very black. They're not very culturally competent. You don't find culturally competent devotees of a guru going to India. You don't find that. I don't know. I'm not saying there aren't other black folks.
Because even like my son's mom, she's a yoga teacher, and like she spent 2 months on separate occasions in India doing a training. But then when they was delivering the training, they were saying that it originated in India. But then she corrected them and said and explained to them that there's evidence predating in Africa for the origins of yoga. And then the next time she went, they adapted that within their program when they was teaching and explaining that it does predate India. So if the teachers are open to taking on new information, then I think it can only be good.
But that's the thing. You lead by example.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've learned. By example, people not looking at people listen to you, but they look at who you are and what you do and the manner in which you do that. Is it something that I can utilize in my own life? And I think that's the thing with mental health and, you know, anxiety and depression. When I was going through that experience, there were no support groups. You went to the doctor, they sent you to a psychiatrist, and they gave you a stack of pills. Now, they've got support groups, they've got, you know, CBT, they've got therapies, there's yoga, there's meditation, there's a whole variety of supporting mechanisms that allow people the space and the time to kind of explore these issues for themselves in a supportive way. So generationally, things have changed massively, but also we've also regressed in some ways because the kind of unconscious binding that communities had has kind of disappeared. So we're a bunch of individuals, and then we coalesce into groups of interest. Whereas before, it's we all know one another, we all moved with one another. And if I don't know you, I know somebody who knows you, or I know your mum, or I know your dad. And there's all that kind of thing. And I think that kind of model, it cuts across communities, it cuts across generations. So there's still that. And it's about how do we work with that to prevent people getting to the place where they have to feel, or they feel that their only option is to take their life. And I think, you know, both yourself and Simone have shared really, really beautiful, poignant points that as communities, there are issues that we need to address. And there are things that we are doing and can do that are making a difference. And it's about taking both and looking at the whole thing and being able to say, you know what, well, I'm feeling down today, but Brother Otis showed, no, he does breathing exercises or mindfulness. Tell me about that. Because the idea of us sharing is one of the things that keeps us alive. We're in an ecosystem that shares. Trees share oxygen. We take their oxygen and breathe carbon dioxide. They utilize it. So everything's relational, and it's how we utilize that in our own life and that on the bigger, where we're working with community and stuff. And I'm afraid, we're out of time, guys. But, you know what I mean? It's been a really, really, really positive and open conversation, and I give thanks, Otis. I definitely will be doing the WhatsApp group. I'll definitely be in contact with TAP about, you know, whatever, how we can work together. And Simone, give thanks. Thank you for your valuable contribution, and hopefully we can address some of the issues moving forward in life. So thank you very much.
Just want to say thank you for inviting me, Barrington, and thank you for your input, Simone. It's been sorry, my son's making noise with the cars. It's been a great conversation, and hopefully we'll have many more and see what we can implement amongst our communities.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.